Morning. All right, so we are continuing our series here on face-to-face meetings with Jesus and how meeting Jesus changes everything. We've looked at John's disciples coming to follow Jesus a few weeks ago. We looked 2 weeks ago at the woman at the well and how her life changed, and not just hers, but her whole community. They all changed because of her encounter with Jesus. And last week with Uncle Glenn, we looked at Nathaniel, and we looked at skepticism and how that was dealt with. So as we continue on, we are this morning going to look at the idea of desperation. What does it feel like to be truly desperate? When you're at the end of your rope and all options are exhausted and your hope is faded. When we think of desperation, we often try to kind of hide, if we have desperation, to kind of put on a good face, right? Act like everything is just fine. It's often hard for people to see if you are desperate, as we don't really like to show it. We just want everyone to think that we have no problems. And we kind of hide the fact that sometimes we are in desperation. I want you to see if you can think of a time when you were truly desperate in your life. A time when you really were feeling or showing or involved in this hopeless sense that a situation is so bad as to be impossible to deal with. We all have probably had times in our lives when we feel this way about something. Many times it may not be as bad as we think it is, but we feel this way. We feel that we're desperate. Just stuck in a circumstance that you can't seem to get out of. Sometimes, though, it can be really that bad, and you don't know what to do about it. You just find yourself in this situation where you just don't have any answers, but you know something has to change. To start off this morning, before we get into the text about the woman in Mark 5, we're going to look at a brief story from history, as I like to do, that ties into this biblical story. Whenever I kind of come up with these stories, I always think, I'm sure there's some smart people out in the crowd that have heard these all before, and maybe you have. But maybe there's a little bit to it that you haven't before, but I hope this story can kind of relate to, as we start to look at the woman in Mark chapter 5. So this story is titled, The Handshake That Healed a Soul. This is the story of Joseph Merrick. In the late 1800s in Victoria, London, there lived a man named Joseph Merrick, known cruelly to the world as the Elephant Man. Much like the woman we'll see in Mark 5, Merrick suffered from a severe disfiguring condition, likely Proteus syndrome. His head was enlarged, his skin was covered in thick, cauliflower-like growths, and one of his arms was essentially useless. Also, like the woman in our text, Merrick lived in total social isolation. He was considered unclean and terrifying to look at. To walk in public, he had to wear a burlap sack over his head with a single slit for his eye, draped in a long black cloak to hide his body. If you went out without it, crowds would mob around him, not to help, but to scream at him or beat him. For years, his only value was as a sideshow freak. People paid pennies to gawk at his misery, but nobody ever touched him with kindness. He was an outcast in the truest sense. Eventually, a doctor named Frederick Trevis took Merrick into the London hospital. He gave him a room, but Merrick remained deeply guarded. He assumed he was a monster. He would often curl up in the corner, expecting rejection. He had internalized the world's disgust. He believed that he was unlovable. The turning point in Merrick's life didn't come from medicine, but from a face-to-face encounter. Dr. Travis asked a famous actress of the time, a woman named Madge Kendall, to visit Joseph. It was a massive risk. Most women fainted or fled upon seeing him. When Mrs. Kendall entered the room, Joseph retreated to the shadows, ashamed. But Mrs. Kendall didn't recoil. She didn't gasp. She walked straight up to him with a warm smile. And then she did the unthinkable. She reached out her hand, a hand of status, of beauty, and cleanliness. And she took Joseph's distorted, rough hand in hers. She took it firmly and smiled at him right in the face. Dr. Travis, watching from the corner, recorded what happened next. He said that Joseph Merrick let go of her hand, bent his head over his knees, and began to sob. It wasn't out of sadness. It was the shock of restoration. He told the doctor later, "It's the first time a woman has ever smiled at me. And the first time one has ever touched me." From that day forward, Merrick changed. He stopped acting like an animal and began to carry himself with dignity. He started writing poetry. He built intricate models. The monster was gone. Not because his body had cured, but because a touch had restored his soul. This story is similar to the one we're going to look at in Mark chapter 5. When people are seen and even see themselves as outcasts, as we see, a simple gesture goes a long way. So when we pick up the story in Mark 5, we see Jesus on an urgent mission. We see in a few verses at the beginning of this section that there's a man named Jairus and his daughter's dying. And so this large crowd is following Jesus, pressing in. They're in a desperate mode here to see what Jesus can do about this girl. The atmosphere is tense. People are waiting to see what's going to happen. When amazing things are happening, people want to be a part of it. They just want to be there, at least, to be a witness and say, "I was there when this amazing thing happened." Jesus made people feel this way. People would follow him to see the amazing things he was doing. Some would follow just to see the miraculous moments and be amazed at them. Not really seeking anything spiritual, but just looking for a show. As we see, though, not everyone was like this. There were some that wanted to have their lives really changed. Not just for a story to tell, but for a better life. Jesus could see who these truly faithful people were. So in the middle of all this chaos, in the middle of this crowd, there's one person whose desperation is greater than anyone else's. She's unnamed, defined only by her suffering, as a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who suffered much under many physicians. But as we'll see, her story isn't just about a physical miracle. It's about how a desperate, hidden act of faith led to a public, life-changing, face-to-face encounter with Jesus. So the woman's condition was more than just a medical problem. It was a crisis that had cost her everything in her life. She had been physically drained. In verse 25, is subject to bleeding for 12 years. This is a chronic, debilitating, and constant thing that she has been dealing with. We find that she has been financially ruined. That she had suffered a great deal and she spent all that she had. She was broke, trying to find the cures things that had only kind of seemed to make things worse. She was a victim of failed solutions. But she was also socially and spiritually isolated. And this really is the key. Under the law, her condition made her unclean. In Leviticus 15, it says, if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanliness. As in the days of her impurity, she shall be unclean. So here she was for 12 years, unclean. This issue affected her entire life. She couldn't go to the temple to worship. She couldn't have normal family relationships, like a shared meal or even a hug with a family member. Anything and anyone she touched became unclean. So she was an outcast, living in a world of shame. So as we find her in this crowd, to be there was a massive risk. She was simply breaking the law just by being there with all of those people in the middle of it. But she had to take the risk that getting close to Jesus would be worth it. So this shows her desperation. She knew that she was supposed to stay away from people, especially in large crowds like this. But her desperation had reached a point where it was worth taking the risk. So instead of her desperation crushing her, it fuels this single focused act of faith. It says that she had heard the reports about Jesus. Hope began with hearing about Jesus. She heard that he was different. Someone that could help. Someone that was doing amazing things. The news of the things Jesus was doing at this time was spreading quickly. And people knew that he was powerful and could change their lives if they could get to him. Whenever amazing things were happening, of course, there's going to be people that are go out and tell them, did you see this? Can you believe what he did? And these stories would spread and grow. And people just wanted to get a glimpse of Jesus, be close to see something amazing, and to be a part of it. It says then that she came up behind him. And she knew that, she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. She knew that she didn't have to just get Jesus' attention, but just a little glimpse, just a little touch of his clothes, that's going to be enough. This was a raw, desperate attempt. But her faith was pointed at the right person. She believed Jesus was the source of power. That just a touch would be enough. That it would be worth taking this risk. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't want to bother him. She didn't want to bother Jesus. She just wanted to have a blessing within this crowd. As soon as she touched his clothes, it says that immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. The power was real, and the healing was instant. She knew it. She could tell right away. And she got what she came for. She had faith that all it would take was just to touch his clothes. She wasn't looking for a big public display, something that people could make a great story out of. something showy, something flashy, something amazing. She wasn't looking for anything like that. She just wanted to see what a simple touch would do. She had faith that all it would take is just this simple touch of his clothes. This is very admirable of her. She didn't even want to disturb Jesus as he was going on and doing the things he was doing. Not even wanting to disturb him, let alone make some show of it. She was just simply humble in her desperation. The story could have ended there, just as a simple secret healing. But as we know, Jesus is after more than just simply fixing the body. Jesus wants to restore her soul, wants to give her more than what she came for. This brought about a face-to-face that she was not expecting, or one that she wasn't even looking for. It says, and Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? Jesus here is on his way to an emergency. There's this girl that needs his help. But within the crowd, he stops. He felt power leave him. This is the difference between the touch of the crowd and the touch of faith. The crowd was bumping into Jesus. They were all around him. He was being touched all the time. But she was drawing from him. We see the disciples' confusion in verse 31, saying, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? They see the chaos. They see all the people around. They'd be thinking, of course someone touched you. There's people everywhere. But this is where Jesus sees the individual amongst the crowd. In verse 33 it says, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. She was scared about what was going to happen if people knew that she had done something. This is what she was trying to avoid. But she's been found out. She's this unclean person who has touched a rabbi. She's exposed. She'd probably expect judgment. This was not something that she was allowed to do. But it says she told him the whole truth. In her fear, she's fully honest. And this is her first face-to-face moment with Jesus. This verse here is the climax. Jesus doesn't just confirm her healing, but he completes it. And he gives her three things that she had lost. The first is a new identity. Jesus said to her, daughter. He doesn't call her woman or unclean one, but he calls her daughter. He places her into his family, a personal greeting. He publicly ends her shame, restores her identity to him. The second is he also gives her a clear faith. He says, your faith has made you well. He clarifies what has happened. It isn't the garment that was some magic power, but it was her faith that brought God's power. And he affirms her for that faith. The third is simply complete peace. He says, go in peace and be freed from your disease. Go in peace. It means more than no more conflict, but it means wholeness, completeness, this well-being that now she has in her life. Jesus didn't just simply heal her body, but he restored her to her community, to her faith, her life, her family, and sends her out now as whole. The woman came for just a touch of Jesus, but she left with a complete new identity. She came for physical healing. She left with spiritual and social restoration. Her face-to-face meeting with Jesus changed everything. So what is the thing in your life that has been a constant struggle? What's the thing you've been dealing with, maybe just for days, but maybe for years? Something that may make you feel shame. Something that you feel isolates you from friends or family or even the church. Something that may be draining your life. We have things in our life that we currently or have struggled with in the past. We're far from perfect people. There's probably something in our life that we may not see as a huge issue like this, that's very out and open. But there's still maybe something that we need Jesus' help with. Maybe you tried to rid yourself of this, possibly bringing you to financial, emotional, or spiritual bankruptcy. Just trying to get out of it. But you've heard about Jesus, as the woman did. You've heard about Jesus, but you stayed in the back of the crowd, not really sure you want to be truly seen by him. But Jesus is stopping for us. He's waiting for us to approach him. He notices the touch of desperate faith, even in a chaotic world. So don't just be in the crowd around Jesus in your daily life. He's inviting you to reach out. You don't have to clean yourself up first, thinking you need to come to Jesus ready and informed. But bring your desperation, bring your shame, everything that you carry, and reach out. He wants to see you, look you in the eye, and not just fix your problem that you're seeking to fix, but call you son, call you daughter, and restore you completely. The woman in Mark 5 was living an obvious, desperate situation. It affected every part of her daily life. She was desperate for a physical healing. But what she got, as we see, much more than just the physical healing. She came face to face with Jesus, and her life changed from that point on. We may not see ourselves in such an obvious desperation, but we all have things we would like to change or improve on. Possibly something we need to really rid ourselves of. So Jesus is here for us to approach in our desperation. To go to Jesus with hope and come away with peace. Anytime we come to Jesus, he changes our life in ways that we don't fully understand. But let us take the example of this woman and seek Jesus in our desperation.